So cap and trade, as it has worked for 1 year, in my view, is funding projects and programs that are helping to achieve our climate goals. The cost to Californians have thus far been modest, if negligible. That is great, and it should continue. But what a lot of Californians don't yet understand is that cap and trade is about to grow in a big way. Next year, in 2015, the cap and trade system will expand from covering polluting industrial plants, known as stationary sources, to include carbon-based fuels, oil, ethanol, diesel, and natural gas. Now, I know many of you, and a lot of us have been around for a while, and we recall the state's energy crisis of the early 2000s and other instances where very good and well-intended public policies led to serious crises. And I am here in part to say today that I'm concerned that bringing fuels under cap and trade leaves consumers vulnerable to anti-competitive behavior and Wall Street traders, which have led in the past to unpredictable price spikes and shortages. It wasn't just the energy crisis. It was the mortgage crisis and the financial crisis of 2008, all of which were caused by unregulated trading and market manipulation. However we move forward, we must be mindful of the law of unintended consequences. I'm not alone with my concerns. A 2008 Congressional Budget Office report cautioned that CO2 allowance prices could affect energy prices, inflation rates, and the value of imports and exports. Volatile allowance prices could have disruptive effects on markets for energy and energy-intensive goods and services. In 2013, a report by the California Air Resources Board warned that these allowances create, quote, the potential for a wide range of price outcomes. In other words, there is a real risk of spikes and real fluctuations in gas prices. If these forewarnings materialize next year, or in 2016, or in 2017, California's hardworking, low and middle class families whose budgets are already hand-to-mouth will suffer most. And if gas prices spike and fluctuate wildly, I'm concerned that the climate change skeptics, and they're still out there, will use any crisis to try to unravel AB 32 and weaken our essential climate goals. So today, I am proposing strengthening, and I emphasize strengthening, our state's climate policy through 2050. The targets only go currently to 2020. And I propose that we acknowledge and embrace the clear connections between climate change and poverty as we build on our state's stellar record of environmental leadership, and that we add the beginning of a tax reform discussion to boost. I propose 4 key principles. Number 1, that we set aggressive targets in statute beyond 2020 to break our fossil fuel addiction and reinforce the climate goals of AB 32, not just through 2020, but through 2030 and 2050 as well. Number 2, that we continue cap and trade for stationary sources for the polluting industrial plants. I want to repeat that. We continue cap and trade for polluting industrial plants known as stationary sources, but that we replace the cap and trade's current 2015 planned expansion into the fuel economy with a broader, more stable, and more flexible carbon tax of a similar amount on these fuels. 3, that we return most of the carbon tax revenue from fuels to poor and middle class families through an earned income tax credit. And 4, that we inject the remaining carbon tax revenues into a multi-billion-dollar 21st century development of California's mass transit infrastructure to reduce traffic and pollution from cars that use gasoline and to give working people a real alternative. With some differences, these ideas mirror what British Columbia in Canada has done since the late 2000s. And early evaluations show their program to be a great success both in reducing greenhouse gas emissions and in maintaining a strong economy. Let me emphasize that nothing in what I lay out here in this proposal, and it's merely a proposal, will roll back or otherwise weaken any greenhouse gas requirements, including the low carbon fuel standard. Now, there will be critics on the left. They're already out there. There will be naysayers on the right. But in my view, we have a moral imperative to act, and we should not be afraid of asking hard questions. Whether I'm right or whether I'm wrong, whether this is the perfect proposal or not, what's important is that on major areas of public policy, like how we are going to regulate billions of dollars worth of resources, we ought to have a public discussion about that. We ought not to be afraid to ask the difficult questions. On the issue of climate change itself, let me be clear, we have no choice. We must reduce the amount of carbon we put into the air, and that will come with a price. Nothing is free. A carbon tax is not free, and cap and trade is not free. Under either applied to fuel, consumers will undoubtedly pay more at the pump. And it may not be popular to say, but that's necessary. Higher prices discourage demand. If carbon pricing doesn't sting at least a little bit, we won't change our habits. On how this requirement is achieved, we have a choice. And I believe a carbon tax is a better choice than cap and trade for fuels, not for stationary sources, for fuels. Under cap and trade, no one can tell us whether fuels will trade at 10 cents or 40 cents a gallon in 2015 or 2016 at any given time, and without a warning. On the other hand, a carbon tax is stable. A carbon tax is significantly less vulnerable to gaming. A carbon tax is transparent. Under my proposal, the price of carbon is projected to rise gradually but predictably, starting at an estimated 15 cents a gallon in the first year, rising to 43 cents a gallon by the year 2030. In 2020, the year current AB 32 targets end, it is estimated that the carbon tax I propose would cost 24 cents a gallon, which is still lower than the upward price risk under cap and trade at 40 cents a gallon. It is not until, again, 2029, 2030 that a carbon tax on gasoline is estimated to pass the upward price risk of cap and trade. Now, I know that's thick and a lot of numbers, but it's important, I felt it important to lay out some level of detail so you know what we're talking about. A gradually increased carbon tax that is stable and predictable, juxtaposed to trading allowances for fuels under cap and trade, which can fluctuate in ways that are much less predictable.